Hey there, I'm Adam Hamilton, and I am coming to you from mile marker 55 at the Lake of the Ozarks. This is the Kaufman Bend Road, or Kaufman Bend portion of the lake. Like I said, the 55 mile marker. And I want to welcome you. I am here tonight, heading back to Kansas City tomorrow. I'll be back in the office all day, or all this week. And this is the same time we used to do Tuesday night Vespers. Well, close to the same time. It's a little after 8 o'clock right now. And the sun's getting ready to set down here at the lake. And this is, I'm coming to you as our latest episode of Making Sense of Faith. And so my name is Adam Hamilton. I'm the senior pastor at the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection in Kansas City. And just thought I'd film this here. This is one of my happy places. And I spent the last week here on vacation and also finishing writing a book on understanding the crucifixion called Why Did Jesus Have to Die? And just time with my family. It was great. 4th of July weekend here. My granddaughter was here. It was just a wonderful, wonderful weekend. I spent today, so I was back at work today, but I was working from here. I was working on this weekend's sermon. I'm the senior pastor at the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection in Kansas City, and I was working on the sermon for this weekend. This weekend, we're in the middle of a series of sermons tied into our vacation Bible camp. So this coming Sunday, a week from Monday, today's Tuesday. A week from yesterday, we start our Vacation Bible Camp at Church of the Resurrection. We've got about 1,200 kids and 500 youth and adults who are volunteering and helping. And it's going to be awesome. And the theme is built around the wild kingdom, God and animals. So the sermons this month are built around the same theme. So this weekend, I'm going to be preaching on God, lost dogs, and will there be pets in heaven? And so kind of a fun theme that I often am asked about when it comes to animals in heaven, pets in heaven. But I also am talking about lost dogs and how actually animals in the Bible, there's 120 different species of animals that are mentioned. And often animals are used as an analogy or a metaphor for God's relationship to us. And so this weekend, we're going to talk about God and dogs. The Bible doesn't talk much about dogs, a little bit, but more often about sheep and lost sheep. This weekend, I'm going to be talking about what happened on the 3rd of July, right here at the lake, when our oldest dog, Maybelle, was scared when one of the neighbors shot off a really loud firework, and she ran off, and we couldn't find her for an hour and a half. And so I'm going to tell that story, and we're going to talk about what it was like searching for this dog that you love, and then what it's like when God is searching for lost people. And so anyway, that's where we're going this weekend. I was enjoying writing the sermon down here today. I'm going to finish it tomorrow in my office. But really a great time. All right, so what I wanted to do today is last Friday on the 4th of July, I posted something on Facebook that ended up garnering a lot of responses. I think last time I looked, there was over 600 people who responded. And I was posting about the title that President Trump gave, a one big beautiful bill, the BBB. And so I posted something about it. I had spent some time trying to understand what was in it. And like many of you, I've been watching over the last month as it went from the House to the Senate, back to the House. And I thought, I'm not really sure what all's in it right now. And I spent some time trying to read the analyses of it. In particular, I was interested in what was going on when it came to SNAP, that is Supplemental Nutritional Assistance, the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. And so I was interested in what happened there and what happened with Medicaid. And so on Friday, 4th of July, I wished everybody on Facebook a happy 4th of July. And then I posted here's kind of a summary of what, at least on the things that I was focused on, that I had found. And I tried to do that in a way that hopefully, tried to bring people, at least what I was hoping was to kind of bring people together, and at the same time to be able to say, but there's some things that, that I have concerns about. And in response, and I said, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I was hoping to foster a conversation. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And as you share your thoughts, do it with respect. Well, there are times I forget something that I know very well, and that is that people feel very passionate about their politics. And so there were a lot of people who shared very respectfully their thoughts, their opinions. Here's some things that I like. Here's some things I don't like. And then there were some people who were like, you shouldn't be talking about this. This is politics and religion, and they shouldn't mix. And there were people who were saying, you should have you should have stood up harder and more firmly against this bill. And there were people who say you shouldn't have opposed it at all. And I didn't oppose the whole bill. I just said there's things I agree with, things I disagree with, but these are my concerns. And then there was a whole lot of people who got pretty angry, not at me, but at each other in the conversations. I've only read about 300 of the comments, so I didn't read them all. But I thought I'd mention a few of them here, and then I want to just comment on a couple of those in particular. And really how we think about religion and politics and how those two connect. But first I want to remind people, so there are folks who are from Resurrection who think that everybody who's posting on there are Resurrection people. Just to remind you, I think I have 70,000 followers on Facebook, and 10,000 of them are Church of the Resurrection people. So there's, something like 60,000 people who are parts of other churches, or maybe they don't go to church at all. And so, you got to decide whether you want to be involved in that kind of banter or not. What I was hoping was to, again, foster a kind of civil conversation around this bill that had just passed. But again, that happened for some and not for other people. So I understand for some of you were disappointed. For some of you, and maybe I didn't add it up, but there were people who were on the right who were disappointed. There were people on the left who were disappointed. So I managed somehow to be an equal opportunity offender. But I do want to talk just a little bit about this question of, let me just start off by saying the comments that I read, here's what I heard, the 6 main things. You shouldn't mix politics and religion. Number 2, you should have been stronger in criticizing the bill. And again, this wasn't about criticizing a president, but talking about a bill that Congress had just passed. You should have been stronger in criticizing the bill. You should not have said anything critical of the bill. Some people said that I was guilty of, what do they call it, both-sidism, and so trying to pander to both sides. Let's see, arguments. So some of the comments were arguments over the bill's increase in ICE funding, which I hadn't really talked about at all. That was not what I was focused on when I was looking at the bill. I was focused on Medicaid and SNAP. The concern for people who will be harmed by cuts to Medicaid and SNAP, people whose insurance costs are going up, who currently buy their insurance on the exchanges. Those were the things that I most frequently saw. So again, I posted made the post or put that on Facebook after watching the debate over, on both sides over the last month, and then looking at the final House passage, and then on July 4th, the president was going to sign it into law, and I thought I just want to find out a little more about what the implications were for people who were living in poverty or living on the edge of poverty. And, as I was reading the analyses, I always try to read people on the right, people on the left. So I was reading those. I read what the White House said. And you would think they were, in some cases, talking about 2 different bills. And so then trying to get down to, okay, who do I trust to actually analyze this? And recognizing there's some truth in all of these perspectives or different perspectives on the same bill. So again, what I was most interested in, and by the way, I mentioned, I think in my post on Friday, that there are things in the bill that at least of the things I found out about, there are a lot of things I still don't know. It's 900 pages and I haven't read it. But there were things in the bill that I think, most reasonable people would go, yeah, of course, that's a good thing to do. And there are other things that people would strongly disagree about. I was most interested in, again, as I mentioned, how the bill would affect the poor. The debate I'd most closely followed was about the $800 billion cut to Medicaid. So that's $186 billion cut, and in addition to that, $186 billion cut to the SNAP program, Supplemental Nutritious Assistance Program. So when something addresses the poor, at least in my mind, it moves from being simply about politics to being a question that we ask when we're people of faith. So I want to talk about religion and politics and the connection between those two for just a minute. I actually want to start with something else that happened in the news today. I had a reporter call me today about this, asking about an IRS decision that was made, something that the president had wanted to see happen, I think, in his first term. But an IRS decision today that pastors and churches can, it sounds to me like the decision says, I tried to read as much of it as I could, that pastors and churches can endorse candidates, or at least from the pulpit, you can encourage people to vote for a particular candidate in an election, or you can oppose a candidate. And this seems to be in direct contradiction to something Congress passed in 1954 called the Johnson Amendment, named after then Senator Lyndon Johnson, which said that if you are a nonprofit, you are not to be endorsing or opposing candidates. But the IRS today interpreted that for the first time in, 70 years, interpreted that to mean that pastors are just having family conversations about an important topic. So just a few words about that. However the IRS interprets it, The reality is that there have been churches that have violated this for a long time, and the IRS didn't generally go after them. That included some African American churches. It included a number of conservative and evangelical churches that were heavily engaged in politics. That did not include churches like Church of the Resurrection. So at Resurrection, as many of you know, the church that I pastor, United Methodist Church in Kansas City, and many other churches across the country, you're going to find both Republicans and Democrats. And so when it comes to campaign season, we don't have candidates speak. We don't recognize them in worship unless both candidates are there, or they're both going to be there sometime on that Sunday. Our Sunday school classes can't even invite candidates to come and speak in their Sunday school classes unless they have both candidates there. We have, these are rules we've set up as a church body. I don't endorse candidates. We don't have our pastors or others endorse candidates. Now, individually, you can support candidates, but when it comes to publicly from the pulpit or in your congregation endorsing a candidate, we don't do that. You can talk about issues, and that's really important to be able to talk about issues. And so, but at Resurrection, again, we're divided about 40% Republican, 40% Democrat, and 20% Independent. And my aim is to honor all of those people, while at the same time inviting us to think about how does our faith speak into what's going on in the world around us and in our daily lives. Okay, so, and I would just say, churches that were already doing this are going to celebrate the decision of the IRS today, and they're going to keep doing what they were already doing. And most churches, I think, are going to be thoughtful and say, we're not going to be endorsing candidates from the pulpit. Okay, so does that mean we should never talk about religion and politics together? And I've spent a lot of time thinking about this and spent the last 35 years in ministry navigating this as well. And so when political decisions become moral decisions, the church needs to speak. And pastors need to speak, and religious people need to speak. If you read the prophets, so if you've not actually read the Hebrew prophets, you should read them. When you read the Hebrew prophets, you're going to find that they are routinely speaking about issues that today many people would call political. And by the way, I've found that a lot of times when people are upset about, hold on a second, there we go, sorry about that. And so when people are upset with their pastor sometimes for speaking about, quote, politics or mixing politics and religion, it's usually because they don't like what the pastor said about, something that disagreed with their politics. I find nobody complains when I'm saying something that they think agrees with their politics. It's always when it's the opposite. And that's okay. That's understandable. We feel very passionately about politics. But there is a time and a place where when politics moves into, and actually politics was once famously defined as who gets what, when, and where, and how maybe. And so often when we're making decisions about programs, about benefits, about how we spend our money as a country, many of those have a moral dimension to them. And many of them are going to turn into not simply politics, but ethics. So here's the question I have as for you and for me also when I'm pastoring and preaching. And that is, if the church is not shaping our ethics and our morality, not our politics, but let's just say if the church is not shaping our morality and our ethics, our sense of what's right and wrong, our sense of compassion and mercy, and how we look at, the people who are marginalized or the people who are, who are often mistreated or oppressed or have no power. If the church doesn't care about them and doesn't speak up for them, and if the church isn't inviting us to shape our thinking around that, then who is? So do I want the Republican or the Democratic candidates or the Republican and Democratic senators or congresspeople or president? Am I looking at them as our chief ethicist? Now, I hope that they practice what they do ethically, but I'm not counting on the Republican and Democratic Party being the primary source of shaping the morals and values of our country. I think the people should be shaping the morals and values of the Republican and Democratic parties. And so who's shaping the morals and values of the people? Well, I think if you're a Christian, it should be Christ. It should be the Bible. It should be, what we talk about at church. And so when you read the Hebrew prophets, you're going to find, and we know these verses, the most famous ones, Micah 6:8, what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and love kindness and walk humbly with God? What is justice? Well, in Scripture, justice is being concerned for the people who are powerless. In the courtroom, it was the people who had power could bribe their way out of something, but making sure they had justice was making sure that whether you had money or power, you didn't get a favorable judgment. Everybody had equal access to the law. And justice, there's a lot of other ramifications to it, but this was really important. Let justice roll down like a river and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream, we read in the prophets. Or Isaiah. I think about Isaiah. And if you read Isaiah, starting with chapter 1, Isaiah 1, God is really challenging the Israelites. He's saying, I'm sick of your sacrifices. I'm sick of your worship. I'm sick of you have blood on your hands. And then he says this, he says, seek justice, help the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow. In the scriptures, in the Hebrew Bible, there's typically 3 or 4 categories of people that are routinely advocated for by the prophets. That had to do with widows. It had to do with orphans because they were powerless. It had to do with aliens in their midst, which were strangers or immigrants who were foreigners from another country. And it had to do with the poor. Those were like 3 or 4 of the categories most often talked about in the Hebrew Bible. And so clearly, God thinks this is important. This isn't like, well, that's politics. No, this is religion. This is about ethics. It's about morality. So these are things that the church should speak about. And if the church isn't speaking about these things, then who is? Right? But then you try to speak about these things, and I had to remind some people about this in private messages. It's like, we're a church where we have different ways of thinking about what role does the government play in addressing these issues. And so, some who are angry because I didn't come out bombastically, I'm like, my hope is to help people hear. I want people to think about these things. So I'm going to raise these questions, I hope, in a way that people can hear and not just poke people in the eye. And it's not about being a Republican or a Democrat. It's just about thinking about who are in those 4 categories today: the foreigner, the widow, the orphan, the person who is poor, the marginalized, the powerless, and then how do our policies speak into that, right? And so I would just say, when it comes to speaking about religion and politics, if we're not talking about those kind of issues, then the church is not doing its job. We need to be talking about that, and we need to be a part of making a difference in those areas. So anyway, that, for me, if you go back and read the post, it was a pretty innocuous post. It was like, okay, here's what I understand that we just passed. There are some things there I would agree with, but here's some things I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about, in particular, so I listed as I understand them, the terms of the bill as it related to Medicaid and SNAP. And then said the concerns I have are for, in particular, for people who are difficult to employ and who will struggle to be able to meet the requirements that are in place now for Medicaid, are in place for Medicaid and for SNAP. So, and then I said, what do you think about that? And I appreciate people who raised, sorry about the boats behind me. Everybody's racing to get back to their homes. But I appreciated the folks who raised up questions about ICE. That was appropriate. I mean, regardless of what you think about, immigrants who are here, who, are not here through are not here through the right process, who are illegal. How we treat people is still really important in Scripture as well. And I really appreciated the comments that were raised on that. Now, let me just remind you also, it's not just an Old Testament prophets thing. When it comes to Jesus, Jesus' words in the parable of the sheep and the goats about being concerned for the hungry, the thirsty, the naked, the sick, the imprisoned, and the foreigner, the stranger. This is just a clear biblical mandate. Anyway, so I want to say just a few words about these 2 programs, SNAP and Medicaid. So I spent some time trying to read and understand, when did they start, how did they start. You may know this already, but I didn't. I knew parts of it. But so SNAP was originally the food stamp program. It started in 1939. It lasted for 4 years, from 1939 to 1943, and it ended after 1943 because people were back to full employment, and the condition they left the excess food that they had because so many were in war, and I mean there's just a lot of reasons why they were trying to make use of the food and not let it rot, and they were wanting to make sure that people had enough to eat, starting in 1939. So that lasted for 4 years. 18 years went by before we had this program, and then in 1961 it was restarted as a kind of pilot program, and then in 1964 it was made permanent and came under Congress's authority with costs shared between the federal government and the states. In the 1960s and 70s, the program expanded rapidly with 15 million recipients by 1974. Both Republicans and Democrats, the Democratic administration supported it. In 1981 and 1982, Congress and the White House made cutbacks and increased requirements for qualifications. So you saw it going up and up and up, and then in 1981 and 82, they pulled back on this And by the late 1980s, as a result probably of those pullbacks, there was an increase in hunger in the United States, and Congress increased the amount designated for domestic hunger relief. That's what SNAP is about. In the 1990s, there was a pullback on these programs again, and kind of like the bill that just passed, there were work requirements that were added to it and limitations for how many months you could receive these. My point is that, you know, what happened on Friday in the bill has happened multiple times over the history of this program. It's not like it's always been there and then it disappeared. It's come and gone at various times, and work requirements have been a part of it in the past. Here's some data that I thought was interesting from the USDA. So the United States Department of Agriculture, I think, had administered this program most recently, and so they had data they had charts that go back, from decades, but so they listed in last year people who were food insecure at some point. Actually, this was in January of this year. People who were food insecure at some point during the year in the United States. It was 13.5% of U.S. households were food insecure at some time during 2023. That's the latest year that we have data for. That means that at some point they had insufficient funds to be able to feed their own family for a period of time. That was up by 1 million people from 2022. So then there are, the next category down is low food security people who needed food programs to meet their needs on a more consistent basis. That was 8.4% of U.S. households, 11.2 million households who had low food security in 2023. That was up 1 million also from 2022. Now you remember in 2020, 2021, COVID, there was a whole lot of people who were reaching out and providing aid and helping people during that period of time, and that began to dry up. So a very low food security. Very low food security means that the food intake for a family was reduced or disrupted during the year. That is, they did not have enough to eat when they went to bed that night. And this was due to not having enough money or gaining the assistance they needed to meet their needs. That was 5.1% of the population, 6.8 million U.S. households. So if you add all that up, that's something like 35 million U.S. households. And the vast majority of those have children. So these are typically not individuals, but these are children. And so during the first Trump administration, these numbers actually continued a slow decline that had been going on for some time. So if you went back to the first Trump administration, you'd find, I don't know that it was due to any particular programs. I think it was the programs that have been going on for a long time, but the numbers went down. And then they shot dramatically up in 2020 with COVID, in 2021, 2022, and they begun to sort of level off as near as I can tell. So what happened with SNAP in the BBB, the bill that was passed on Friday? There are current work requirements for SNAP. If you're going to receive food aid, you up to age 54. So once you're an adult, up to age 54, if you were able-bodied, you had to work 20 hours a week to qualify, or I think you could also go to school for 20 hours a week, or you could be getting job training, or you could be volunteering, but you had to do something. So that requirement has already been there for people up to age 54. And what happened on Friday was that was moved from 54 to 64. So the requirements to receive SNAP, and those requirements typically have brought the number of people going for SNAP down because there were people who couldn't qualify, they couldn't produce the paperwork, whatever. But so that does have an impact on it. But this was an addition to that, and the amount of funds provided by the federal government for SNAP was reduced, and that was reduced. I'm trying to remember. I think I said a moment ago. I think it was reduced by 180. Let's see. Yeah, I don't have it here, but in any case, so those funds were reduced in the bill that was passed on Friday, and states are required to kick in more. So states contribute to this as well. Okay, Medicaid. So it's appropriate to just ask, how are people going to eat if they're hungry? And it's appropriate to think, whenever possible, we should encourage people to have the dignity of working, of volunteering, of working to educate themselves so they can get a job. And I want to come back to this in just a moment. But so there's both a concern for the poor and making sure there's enough food, and making sure that children are not going hungry, and making sure that, or trying to see people actually engaged productively in society. And the Bible supports that as well. So going on to Medicaid. Medicaid is America's health safety net for low-income people. It was established the year after I was born. It was 1965. That year, there was a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic presidency. And in some ways, like we have today, but the opposite. We have a Republican House, Senate, and president. And it was passed on a bipartisan basis, but but not a large number of people who voted for it on the Republican side at the time. And the concern was adding to, government programs and how are we going to pay for them. And I think a concern for, fostering a sense of dependency. I could be wrong. I was reading some of the reports earlier today from 1965. Anyway, what happened on Friday is Medicaid saw a 9% cut in funding. That's $80 billion a year over a 10-year period of time. So $80 billion a year over 10 years. This year's Medicaid spending, just to give you some idea, is $890 billion. So this was a 9% cut in funding for Medicaid. So where would that money come from, that 9%? Well, some of it was thought to come, if you can work at trying to minimize waste and fraud. So there is waste and fraud in the program. Everybody agrees with that. So maybe some can come from that if you can find it. The problem is that it's been hard to find that sometimes. The other was that they hope to save money by requiring, again, able-bodied recipients to work, volunteer, or be in school or job training 80 hours a month. I don't know if that requirement had already existed for Medicaid or not, but I know it existed for SNAP. So now, and it had existed in the past for Medicaid as well. So in addition to that, premium subsidies. Premium subsidies were started in 2021 for the health insurance. As a result of COVID, funds were set aside to be able to help people pay for their health insurance because there were concerns about people being unemployed or underemployed. And so starting in 2021, these subsidies for premiums helped a whole lot of people. And a whole lot of people joined the exchanges. They joined the Affordable Care Act or the insurance exchanges that were part of the Affordable Care Act. So currently, and I was not aware of this, but currently, until some of you mentioned this to me, a person's premiums are capped. If you're on the exchanges and you qualify for the Medicaid supplements or subsidies, it's capped. Your premium is capped at 8.5%. Sorry for the loud noise back behind me. Capped at 8.5% of your income. And what will happen is, so unless Congress, so it was not included in this bill. So this bill didn't take it away. It is going to automatically go away by December. So the bill didn't address it, but many people were hoping that Congress would re-up the subsidies. And if you're very low income, your health insurance might be free under these the Medicaid subsidies. So in December of this year, if Congress doesn't act, these subsidies will go away. When that happens, it's said that what will happen is we'll go back to pre-2021 rates for insurance, although those have also increased over this last 4 years. So, they'll be more than they were in 2021. It's been estimated that for many people, they'll see a 75% increase in their insurance premiums. And some of you noted this on the comments last week. I really appreciate that because I wasn't aware of that. So one person mentioned their health insurance is going to go up $7,000. Somebody else said their health insurance is going to go up $11,000 if nothing happens in Congress. And it doesn't look like the Republican Congress is probably going to do anything about this. And so what will happen is we'll go back to the way things were in 2021. All right. And that will result in a decline in the number of people who are insured in America. So just to give you some idea, in I think it was 2000, it was 2010. In 2010, the U.S. uninsured population was 47 million. In last year, it was 27 million. So a huge change. The Affordable Care Act got a whole lot of people insured who weren't insured before. And what happens if, so you say, well, even if they didn't have insurance, they could go to the emergency room. And that's exactly right. The challenge is that a lot of people won't go to the emergency room and they won't they won't get wellness checks. They won't do a lot of the other things that you should do if you are of moderate means or low income means, you have a limited income and you have children. You may be not getting the help. You may be not getting them or yourself the kind of health care that you need if you don't have health insurance. And so it's likely that the number of people who are uninsured is going to increase as a result of these requirements. Now, again, I'm not fundamentally against the fact that people ought to be working if they can, or they should be volunteering or going to school or something else. So I'm not opposed to that idea. I'm concerned about the people who are difficult to employ, difficult to move into volunteer roles, and are going to find it difficult to be able to, to even go to school. So, if the government was willing to put together a program that puts people to work, and they had the funds for that, and they had social workers who are going to help people who are, difficult to employ, that's great. I think that's a win all the way around if people had a chance and they were able to work. But just because somebody is physically able and they are of the right age and they don't have little children doesn't mean that they actually can work. And I mentioned this, it may not be a huge number of the population, but it's more than you probably think. So I think about people I know at Resurrection who struggle. They have, mental issues, they have mental struggles, and they are, they're not going to be able to hold down a job. They're people that would be very hard to employ. The time it would take to manage those people would be more than whatever value they would add. And unless there was somehow government subsidies of being able to employ these people, they're going to be hard to employ, hard to get in school. And so I worry about those folks. I worry about, what happens to them? What happens when they don't have insurance and food programs available to them? And so, to me, that's a concern. And there are other concerns that I would highlight in the BBB, but that's the only one I wanted to mention. It's what I was focusing on last Friday. And I've not expressed this very well. I'm just sitting here having an off-the-cuff conversation, although I printed out some facts and statistics before I got here. But I think it's appropriate for us as Christians and as a church, as religious people, to say, what happens to the really poor? What happens to the people who don't have the capacity to work or participate in these programs? What happens to them? I think that is a moral question. That is an appropriate religious question. It is a question that's taken up throughout Scripture. And so however we address that, I think, we've got to look at addressing that. And I think what left a lot of people feeling upset was the fact that we found the way to extend tax cuts for a lot of people that were passed during President Trump's first term in office. We found a way to extend those tax cuts that were, going to end the end of this year. But we funded those tax cuts, it feels like, to many people by figuring out how to tighten the screws on people who will struggle. And so whether you're a Republican or Democrat, that doesn't make any difference to me. I think we at least need to think about that and ask the questions. What happens to them? And I think that's a biblical question. And I sense that Republicans and Democrats alike care about this. I was really proud of some of our Republicans, in office who were asking some of these same questions. And so, anyway, none of this was meant to persuade you of anything. It was more just a way of saying, when it comes to making sense of faith, and when it comes to politics, we can't just say, well, religion and politics should never connect. If we do that, then we're going to have entirely secular views shaping our values, our morals, the way we treat one another. What we need is to remember that we're called to love God and to love our neighbor. And our neighbor is anybody who's in need. What we need is to remember that Jesus said at the Last Judgment, if you haven't cared about the poor and the hungry and the thirsty and the naked and the stranger, then you didn't care about me and you're in deep trouble. What we need is to remember what the prophets have said, what God has said through the prophets, that I really don't care about all your religious activity if you don't care about the poor or the widow or the orphan. And so, anyway, so I don't think you want churches and pastors who never talk about morality and ethics, but at the same time, my job isn't to tell you exactly how that should be, how we solve this in office. It's just that you should care about these things. And what I know about Church of the Resurrection, so many of you are not from Resurrection, what I know about Church of the Resurrection is that you deeply care about these things. Republicans or Democrats, you care deeply about these things. So anyway, that's all I got tonight. I probably hacked some of you off, but my hope is for most of you to go, you know what, that's right. We need churches to be able to say, let's remember who we are as humans. Let's remember what the Scripture teaches us about caring for the marginalized and the poor and the hungry and the stranger in our midst. And so, anyway, enough of that. Just wanted to have a chance to share that with you a little bit. I want to encourage you to be in church this weekend. We're going to have a lot of fun this weekend as we talk about God, lost dogs, and will there be pets in heaven. And I'm pretty excited about this sermon. I hope you'll plan to join us. And I'm excited about Vacation Bible Camp starting up next week. And I'm looking forward to, I've loved being down here at the lake. Again, this is my happy place. I walk 3 or 4 miles every morning. I spend that time praying. I've been reading, studying, spending time with my family, just enjoying. In fact, I'm getting ready to go in right now. It's 8:35, but I'm going to spend a little time with LaVon before she goes to bed. But I also thought I kind of wanted you to just see what this is like behind me as the sun's going down and hearing the birds and just knowing, man, I feel God's presence when I'm down here too. So from the 55 mile marker on the Coffin Bend at the Lake of the Ozarks, thanks for joining me tonight. Hope to see you next week on Making Sense of Faith. And if you can, you don't have a church family or you're a part of Resurrection, hope to see you this weekend in church. God bless.
Thanks for tuning in to Making Sense of Faith with Adam Hamilton. Do you know someone wrestling with life's biggest questions? Share this episode with them, because the more people willing to embrace the hard questions, the better. Do you want to go deeper? You can visit makingsenseoffaith.com to find the show notes and additional resources. That's also where you can sign up to get the notes and resources delivered straight to your inbox. If you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe and leave us a rating in your podcast player. That'll make sure that you get the latest episodes and help others find the podcast. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit that notification bell to catch future episodes and videos there. Until next time, remember that your questions matter. Doubts are normal, and making sense of faith is a lifelong journey. We'll see you on the next episode of Making Sense of Faith.